Well, welcome. Our newest psychological health talk, we're going to talk a little bit about sleep. There's going to be a series on sleep coming up in a short period of time, so we're going to hit some highlights today. We're not going to be going into everything possible with sleep. But it is important to recognize that all living systems appear to have sleep-wake cycles. When we're talking about plants, of course, we're talking about something that takes place over a longer period of time, so that plants go into their sleep cycle typically during what we call winter. There's a period of time of inactivity and rest, and then waking up again in the spring and running through that cycle. In animals, it seems to be much more likely, much more commonly divided into a 24-hour period in which there's a period of time of being awake and a period of time being asleep. There are animals that stay awake mostly at night and then are sleeping during the day. The majority of animals are awake during the day and sleep at night. Human beings, it appears, are primarily geared towards being awake during the day, sleeping at night, and we're going to hit just briefly on the impact of doing a third shift work kind of situation and the impact that that has on us. But primarily, it's important to recognize that we run on a 24-hour cycle. Actually, if we're being precise, it's a little less, about 3 to 5 minutes less than a 24-hour cycle, but generally a 24-hour cycle in which we need a certain amount of sleep during that cycle to keep things working and functioning the way that it should. Now, in our society, modern society, we often take it as kind of a badge of courage that, I work a lot and I don't need as much sleep as someone else, or somehow I'm better because I can forego sleep in order to get things accomplished. That actually, while that's culturally valued, it's not an appropriate way to look at the health cycle that's necessary for us in order to be able to be fully engaged. And so we need time to be active. We also need time to rest, and that's where sleep comes in. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through today. So we're going to start by recognizing that there is a cycle. That cycle is regulated in our physiology. And so there are times when we are more awake. There are times when we are more sleepy. It varies a little bit from human being to human being. So some people are what we call early birds. There are people who tend to be most alert in the early morning. They like getting up early. They are left to themselves, they will naturally wake up at an earlier time. There are people who are also, we call night owls, people whose rhythm seems to be more alert in the late afternoon, maybe even into the evening, and they tend to stay up a little bit later and function better in that later time. Most people are not either of those two poles. They're neither early birds nor night owls, but there is a range. And so there are people who seem to do better on a second shift, a kind of a late afternoon, early evening time when they are functioning best. There are people who seem to do best in the early morning, and that can shift a little bit over a person's lifetime, and it can be shifted intentionally, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that today as we get into this. So this whole system is regulated in our brains by something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. We'll call it SCN because you probably don't want to have to remember suprachiasmatic nucleus. You might not even want to remember SCN, but it's a part of the brain towards the center of our brain that regulates that sleep-wake cycle. And as I mentioned before, it seems to be on approximately a 23-hour and 56-minute cycle. We can adjust to a 24-hour cycle relatively easily, but if we were left without any clocks and we didn't have anything regulating it, we gradually move that sleep-wake cycle a few minutes each day. But that cycle is set by this SCN, by the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now, what's important to recognize is that while this is regulating our sleep-wake cycle, all of our major organs also have an internal 24-hour clock that they function on. So, for example, the pancreas also has a 24-hour cycle. Now, here's where it gets to be a little bit touchy. So, if I am not regular with my sleep-wake cycle, and I'm getting up sometimes at 7 a.m. because I need to be at work. There are other times I'm sleeping until 11:30 in the morning, or even into early afternoon, and that sleep-wake cycle is all over the place. That doesn't necessarily mean that the sleep cycles in our major organs are also adjusting to that. So let's assume that somebody is doing what I'm saying. They get up early sometimes for work, they sleep later at other times, and so that SCN, the suprachiasmatic nuclei, is trying to adjust to a 24-hour cycle. But the pancreas is on a different cycle. Now, one of the things that pancreas does is it is responsible for the secretion of insulin, best understood in terms of the risk for diabetes. So when the sleep-wake cycle is off and it's not matching up with the pancreas, that means that the release of insulin is not happening at appropriate times, and that raises the risk of diabetes because the insulin regulation, the blood sugar regulation, isn't matching up with the kinds of daily behaviors that we're engaged in. That's just one example, but it's important to recognize then that this biological clock, this 24-hour cycle, functions best when it's in sync throughout our entire bodies. And that means that if I'm regular in my sleep, and we're going to talk about how important that is as we go through this, if I'm regular in my sleep, and that allows my body to get regular with that biological clock that I have, that behavior of being regular in my sleep has enormous beneficial physiological benefits. My pancreas works better, my liver works better, my lungs and heart work better. All of my major organs begin to be able to operate in sync and therefore function in a way that will be more prone to keep me in optimal health. Sleep is important not simply because it's uncomfortable to be tired, but because it helps us to be able to be regular in our biological processes, our physiological processes, and our psychological processes. So both begin to be affected by this change in sleep. So let's take a look at what happens when we sleep. So there are stages. Today we can get to what we call wearable devices that help us to track our sleep. I have an Apple Watch, and my Apple Watch will keep track of my of the time I'm sleeping, pay attention to my respiration during that time, see if I'm getting some deep sleep and some REM sleep, and so it tracks all of that. I also have an Oura ring. I'm not trying to promote any product. There are a number of products that are good in this area. The ring also keeps track of sleep, and what I find is that they're slightly different. So the Apple Watch gives me numbers that suggest that I'm sleeping a little better. The ring is a little bit more fussy with me and suggests that that sometimes my sleep numbers are a little less than what the watch would be. All of which is to say that the wearables aren't perfect. There is some error built into them, so don't rely on them entirely, but they can be useful to help you to understand. So let's take a look at what happens. So if we start with where it says awake on this side of the typical sleep cycle, we fall asleep and get into stage 1. The sleep cycles are cleverly titled stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. We'll see different nomenclature depending on what kind of wearable you're wearing, but they're very similar. Stage 4 is the deepest of the sleep, and that, as you can see in this chart, tends to happen in the first half of the night. Now, stage 4 is the place during sleep where there's a lot of activity in our brains to clear out any waste products, any issues. It's also the time when our bodies are clearing out the waste products, repairing any damage that's done. If we're going through some healing because of an injury, much of that healing requires a level of deep sleep in order to be as effective as possible. And so deep sleep is the part of the sleep that gives us the deepest level of restoration. It is an important part of sleep. Now, one of the reasons that sleep experts don't recommend using something like alcohol to sleep is that one of the things that happens if you drink alcohol, it makes you tired, you fall asleep, it cuts off that deep sleep. You don't sleep as deeply when you've been brought into a sleepy state by something like alcohol. So that deep sleep is very important. Now, if you look up at the top of the list, it looks, there's something called REM sleep, rapid eye movement, that is an abbreviation for. What we've discovered is that during the times of rapid eye movement, if we wake someone up during the time that happens, and it happens multiple times during the night, when we wake somebody up from the rapid eye movement, they'll report that they were having a dream. We aren't sure that that's the only time we dream, but it is a common time that a person is dreaming. And dreaming is also an important part of sleep. One of the things that we discovered years ago was if you prevent someone, you have them in a sleep lab for several days, and you're watching carefully, and every time they start to do the rapid eye movement, you wake them up, so you essentially make it hard for them or impossible for them to dream. Over the span of a couple of days, they'll start having dreamlike states during their waking time. So we know that dreams are important in some way. There's lots of theories about dreams, and we don't have anything that is definitive yet. So for as long as psychiatry has existed, There's been speculation that dreams have some kind of meaning even before then. In many spiritual traditions, it was believed that the divine could communicate to us through dreams and things like that. And today you can find many kinds of suggestions. So, I had a dream about this, I can look it up, and if this is a part of the dream, it means that. All of that might be true, but we really don't know. There are many different theories about dreams. And there probably as many different theories as there are theorists. It's an area there's a lot of scientific disagreement, but we do know that dreams are necessary. And even though some dreams can be quite disturbing, the lack of dreaming doesn't mean that everything is fine. In fact, we need to dream every night in order to be okay. Now, it is the case that if I'm dreaming, I go into a REM sleep, I go through the REM cycle, my REM cycle stops, my eyes are no longer rapidly moving, and I wake up, then I won't remember a dream. We only remember dreams if we wake up while they're still going on. So we often dream overnight, but don't wake up from it. And when we don't wake up from it, we don't remember that we've had a dream. So if somebody says, oh, I don't dream, what they're saying is they aren't waking up from the dream. Now, it is the case also that we tend to wake up during a dream more frequently towards the end of the sleep-wake cycle. And there's a reason for this. So we know about stress hormones. Adrenaline is the stress hormone that most of us are most familiar with. There's a secondary stress hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone that's released that isn't as intense as adrenaline. It's more long-acting. But it also is a stress hormone that's active throughout the entirety of our normal day. So let's imagine for a moment that you have a day where it is not a particularly difficult day. It's a kind of a normal day. You're having a pleasant experience. You have some challenges, but they're not overwhelming. What we would see is that the cortisol will react to those daily occurrences. And then towards the evening, in a normal, not particularly stressful day, that cortisol will tend to start to drop. And in an ideal situation, it'll hit its lowest level just as we're falling asleep. And so we fall asleep, there's very low cortisol levels. Then it gradually rises overnight, hitting the highest level of the 24-hour period just before we wake up. So the cortisol is starting to activate our systems again and makes it possible for us when we wake up to wake up and feel like we have some energy. If you've ever had the experience of waking up before your alarm and then you kind of fall back asleep, but you've only got a little bit of time before that alarm goes off, and you start to fall into a deeper sleep, so you get past the stage 1, maybe get into stage 2 or even stage 3, and then your alarm goes off. It's really difficult to wake up. It's really difficult to move initially, and that's because the cortisol levels have gotten really low at that point, and you don't have enough cortisol in your system to get that activity going to make it easier to wake up in the morning. It's also the case that when we have a nightmare, part of what's happening is that the cortisol has spiked enough that it causes us to wake up. Typically in a nightmare, we wake up and have some emotion along with that, so we're likely to wake up and feel anxious or feel distressed. Sometimes people will wake up and they're feeling anxious, They don't remember a dream because the dream is finished, but the cortisol has still continued to rise, and the cortisol forces us to wake up, and we wake up feeling panicky. And, one of the things that we need to do in those situations is take care of things in the evening before, so that we can allow our cortisol levels to drop to that lowest level, which makes it more likely that we'll be able to get into restful sleep, get some deep sleep, get some normal REM sleep, and be able to wake up in the morning refreshed. So there's a lot that's going on during this sleep-wake cycle that helps us to be able to clear out, repair damage that's done during the day, have some dreams which seems to in some way be beneficial to us in ways that we're not completely clear, and then wake up in the morning feeling refreshed and energized and ready to meet the day. So also want to take a little bit of time and just comment that part of what's going on in our sleep-wake cycle is that we're responding to different kinds of light. So our ancestors didn't have this problem. Our ancestors pretty much they were pretty much active during the day, and rarely did they spend much time awake at night, and that was because they didn't have electric lights. So it got dark. The end of the day, when it was getting dark, they might have a fire around in their encampment. If they were going off by themselves, they might have a candle or something like that, but the light was very low. Now, when a person talks about, I take melatonin to help me to sleep, melatonin is naturally produced in our bodies when the light starts to dim. So as we get towards the end of the day and the sun's going down, our bodies start to naturally produce more melatonin. You can understand then why sometimes we benefit from some melatonin to help us to sleep in our modern world, because the sun starts to go down, it starts to get dark. We turn on a lot of lights. When we turn on a lot of lights, our body responds to the lights, and it doesn't produce the melatonin that we would normally produce, that is in response to lower light and causes us to feel more tired, more sleepy, ready for an evening of rest. It is also the case that the morning light and the evening light are different. Morning light, when we're exposed to that light, when the sun is coming up, and those first hour or two of that early sunlight, is energizing. So that people who are the early birds, people who get up early, who are exposed to that morning light, they actually have more energy because they're exposed to that morning light. And it makes them more alert during that morning time, which sets up that pattern of liking to get up early, liking to go to bed earlier, not necessarily early, but earlier, because the energy that that morning light gives makes it more favorable for them to have positive energy for themselves in that early light. The later afternoon light, as the sun is going down, we're getting towards the sunset, is more yellowish in its tone. It's also more calming and more restful. So that as we get around to the end of the day, and if you happen to be in a place where you view the sunset pretty regularly, one of the things you'll notice is that as you're watching the sunset, it's associated with quieting, calming, becoming more restful. So there's different types of light, and those different types of light have a different impact on us and affect our sleep-wake cycle. So mental health and sleep. One of the common things that we discover with both anxiety and depression, which are very common kind of basic forms of challenges for people on the psychological or mental health arena is that it will often lead to some kind of sleep disturbance. Now, it turns out that there's different types of sleep disturbance are indications that the basic psychological factors that are going on might be different. So that individuals who are more anxious typically will have a harder time falling asleep. So they will often be individuals who, they go to bed, but they're restless, they're thinking, they're worrying, they have a hard time falling asleep, and sometimes as a result they'll stay up later and later and later, hoping to get so tired that they just can't stay awake anymore. But that kind of initial insomnia is what it's called, that insomnia making it hard to fall asleep is often an indication that there's anxiety going on. We'll talk a little bit in just a second about something you can do about that. People who are depressed will frequently be able to fall asleep. In fact, sometimes they want to sleep too much, so they might sleep during the day and then want to sleep at night. But the insomnia for a person with depression is often that they wake up early. So they might wake up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and during that wake up time, they wake up and they're feeling sad and they're reviewing and experiencing that sadness or going over and over and over the troubles that they're having, the difficulties they're having, the losses they've experienced. So we see different types of insomnia with different types of emotional states. One of the things that you will see if you're working with a clinician is, and particularly individuals that are prescribing psychiatric medications, is they'll frequently check in with you about what's going on with your sleep, because understanding what's going on with sleep gives an indication of where that emotional status might be. And sometimes sleep disturbances happen before the emotions are noticeable. So a person can't sleep and then a day later or 2 days later they find themselves feeling much more anxious. Or they might sleep too much and then very shortly after that they feel more depressed. But they're often experiencing both of those things at the same time. So in the last few minutes I want to go through a few things that you can do that can help you to improve your sleep. So one of the things that probably the most important thing you can do to improve your sleep is to have a regular sleep-wake cycle. By that I mean you go to bed at the same time every day and you get up at the same time every day. Going back to that suprachiasmatic nucleus, that becomes the regulatory system. Now again, our ancestors didn't have much trouble with this because they tended to go to bed when the sun went down, and they've had their campfire and they've told a few stories, and then they drift off to bed. And they wake up when the sun gets up because the sun starts to give them that energy. And so our ancestors didn't have the same challenges that we have because we can change our light so much. So that regularity of going to bed, getting up, really makes a difference. If you want to make a change, one of the things you need to do is go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time 7 days a week. So it would take 2 to 3 weeks to get that rhythm, but once the rhythm is there, then you get tired at the right time. You get to a place where you wake up at the right time, and that becomes a rhythm, and it becomes an easier thing to do. If you find yourself having lots of time where you are overthinking when you get to bed, a simple thing to do is to take about 10 minutes, about an hour before you go to bed, sit down and write out what it is that you might be worried about or the problems that you're having to face. At the end of 10 minutes, stop. Go do something else that will get your mind off of what you just wrote down, and then do your wind down before you go to bed. That gives you a chance to allow that cortisol to drop and for you to be in a more relaxed state. Again, within a matter of a couple of weeks, you'll notice that that's really made a difference, and you'll be waking up fewer times in the middle of the night. You'll be sleeping, you'll be able to fall asleep much more easily. If you're finding you're too fatigued and you are falling asleep too much because you're feeling depressed, we talked last week a lot about how you would benefit from having a little bit more physical activity, particular aerobic activity, and that aerobic activity will help to balance that off. So there's much more to say, but that's where we're going to end today. Just want to let you know, next week we won't be having a new psychological health talk. It'll give you a chance to catch up on some of the talks that we've had before, and go back and be able to view some of the ones that you might find interesting but haven't gotten around to in our YouTube channel, at Stress Management Clinic YouTube channel. And then beginning in July, we're going to have a series where we're going to take a look at the psychological effects of a healthy workplace. What does it mean to bring the science of happiness to work? What is a psychological healthy culture for work? What's a high performance? What's a psychology of excellence? And what are some of the psychologies of teams? So we're going to spend a little bit of time with some of that. Hopefully you will enjoy it. And we will be back at the beginning of July. July 7th will be our next scheduled psychological health talk. Take the time to view this, like it if you enjoy it. Be sure and subscribe, and keep coming back to view all of our psychological health talks on the Stress Management Clinic YouTube channel. Thanks.